Alice Wheeler arrived on a pale Tuesday afternoon, car crunching softly up the pebble drive. She turned off the engine and sat quietly, palms resting on the steering wheel, feeling the little house stare back. Larchview wasn't her idea of home. Still, she'd agreed to look after it while her Aunt Ruth traveled, 17 days, maybe more if her aunt's knees healed slower than hoped. There was a muteness to the street, the ordinary bungalows spaced out by cold, tidy hedges, the slow drift of autumn. Alice hesitated before getting out. That quiet, the almost full silence, pressed lightly around her. It wasn't ominous. Just a kind of hush you got in houses nobody really loved. Her aunt's house was unremarkable, at least on the outside: faded yellow siding, trimmed shrubs, a porch swing that looked more decorative than sturdy. Alice let herself in with the spare key. The hall had a familiar, faint mustiness, the ghost of old laundry detergent and something root-like from the basement. There was plastic over the hallway carpet. Her own house had bare wood floors. She'd never really liked carpets, they kept smells and stories. She placed her overnight bag in the guest room, the one with the twin beds and green curtains. The bed furthest from the window was always Alice's as a girl. She picked it out of habit. She turned slowly, listening to the light noises of a quiet house. The fridge's hum, the dull tick of a clock in the next room. Later, after unpacking and writing her aunt's new medication times on the fridge, Alice walked the hall and checked every door. Kitchen, pantry, side porch, living room with its old upright piano, then dining room with its afternoon gloom. Nothing out of place. She was always like this, careful with borrowed spaces. She carried her pillow back to the guest room. The early dusk pressed in. There was work to send by email, so she set up her laptop by the window. Occasionally, while she typed, her eyes would snag on one detail or another: the hairline crack in the corner where the wallpaper lifted, the faded photo of her late uncle in the gold frame. The little things you notice when it's quiet. Dinner was simple. Soup from a can. She ate at the kitchen table, texting her aunt updates about the roses and the utility bill. Ruth replied with long, wrung-out sentences. The sort older women used when they didn't want to be misunderstood. Much later, Alice made her way back to her room, feeling the house change shape as the daylight faded completely. She switched on the bedside lamp. The guest room felt cozy enough: 2 twin beds, a simple dresser, an old wooden chair in one corner. Alice brushed her teeth in the small and soot, ran the water a little longer than necessary. She let the old habits run through her, checking the window latches, stacking her shoes by the closet, tucking her phone charger behind the lamp. Details. Order. Safety in routines. At 10:30 on the dot, she lowered herself onto the bed, pulled the covers up, and read a paperback until the words blurred. She checked her phone one last time, a habit from years living alone. Then, with a practiced motion, she reached for the lamp and flicked the switch. In the dark, she listened for house noises. The house seemed to seep around her, floorboards settling, faint rattle of a branch against the window. But that was all. The stillness felt complete, almost padded. She turned onto her side, shuffled her pillow, and was almost asleep when a strange sensation ticked at her awareness, something that felt out of place, but wasn't a sound or a sight. Just a feeling. The sense of someone else in the room, as if the quiet had a new weight. She told herself it was part of the house settling, or maybe her mind refusing to switch off. She didn't move, didn't reach for the lamp. She kept her eyes closed, holding on to the idea of sleep. Gradually, the sensation faded, and the house felt empty again. She woke to pale light and the distant growl of a garbage truck. Everything was in order, her shoes still by the closet, phone on the table, nothing disturbed. The sense of someone in the room had vanished so completely, it almost felt like a misplaced dream. She stretched, did her morning checks, window, door, dresser, bathroom. Everything as before. Her day filled easily with work emails, calls, small chores. She learned the house's quieter rules, how the hot water needed 10 seconds to run, how the kitchen window stuck when it rained. She washed her mug, dried it, and set it precisely where it belonged. She did not think about the odd sensation from the night before. Daylight came down quickly again. Alice made herself a cup of tea. She stood in the living room, listening to distant laughter from the next house, and realized how rarely she permitted herself to do nothing. At 10, she read a little in bed, then checked her phone, then stared up at the ceiling trying to remember if she'd always found empty houses unsettling or if she'd grown this way. She switched off the lamp at 10:30, pulling the covers up to her chin. In the darkness, she was distinctly aware of something that darted into her thoughts, a sense like someone else had entered the room, but so quietly the quiet itself was the only clue. It was more certain than the night before. Her skin prickled as she lay very still. The feeling built slowly, not sharp but definite. Not moving. Not menacing. Just there, at the foot of the bed. Alice listened, measured her breathing, told herself she was being silly, and did not move. Her mind scrolled desperately for a reasonable cause, a memory of bunk beds as a child, a crease in the blanket remembered wrong. But there was nothing to explain it. She waited, eyes closed, feeling the weight in the room, until the silence stretched long enough to dissolve her tension. Eventually, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning came, and light filled the room innocently. She sat up slowly, double-checked the end of the bed. Nothing, of course. No sign that anyone, anything, had been there at all. Her days began to settle into the careful stillness she preferred. Alice cooked. She vacuumed the hallway. She texted her aunt. Each night, she performed her quiet routines, brushing teeth, tidying shoes, reading. But after 3 nights, a new knowledge grew. There was a pattern to the uneasy feeling. It came only after the lights were out. Only after she'd finished her book, closed her phone, completed each ritual as if unlocking a door. A strange anticipation crept into the evenings. Around 10:30, she'd find herself glancing at the clock. She'd hesitate briefly before turning off the lamp. Once the room was in shadow, the presence would be there, balanced, silent, just far enough not to touch, but close enough that she felt it. Not a clear shape, not something she could see in the dark, but a careful tension at the end of her bed. Alice waited each time, let her awareness scan for any hint of something real, any movement, sound, change in the air. But the sensation only pressed quietly against her nerves, refusing to grow or fade. No matter how calmly she tried to rationalize, the presence became familiar, like a piece of borrowed furniture she did not use. Always in the darkness, at the same hour. Never before the light went out. Never when she sat up and flicked the lamp back on. And never a sound or sight to prove it. By the end of the first week, Alice realized she was afraid, not of what the presence might do, but of how certain and reliable it had become. The second week at Larchview arrived with rain, drumming softly on the shingles most mornings and lending the world a dull, softened hush that never quite lifted. Alice woke each day to the glow of gray light behind the green guest room curtains. She found herself more attentive to everything in the house and its routines. By now, the presence had become an expected part of the night. With reasonableness that she tried to convince herself was healthy, Alice talked herself through it. She no longer tried to explain it away or ignore it. At some deep level, she simply accounted for it in her plans. She tidied up a bit more before bed. She brushed her hair longer, as if the days needed stretching to make up for the contractions of the night. When she lay down, she checked her phone and stared at its blue light, as if staying even a little awake would delay what she knew waited beyond the lamp switch. Every evening, the pattern repeated. She'd do her slow routine, reading, texting her aunt the status of the lilies, setting a glass of water by the bed. She'd look at her reflection in the dresser mirror and check her own expression, always a little tired, but balanced. Always waiting. 10:30 would come. She'd slip under the covers, and when ready, she'd flick the lamp off. Within a minute, the feeling would arrive. The air seemed to thicken along the length of her legs, a silent tension at the foot of the bed. Alice would lie very still, aware not of an intruder or a specific shape, but simply that something, or someone, was seated there, as patiently as she lay frozen beneath the covers. On the fourth night, the sensation felt so real, so specific, that Alice opened her eyes. Darkness pressed just as solidly as before. She could see nothing, only outlines, but she felt something quietly occupying that space, no sound, but a certainty. When she sat up abruptly and turned on the lamp, the room snapped back to its normal, empty self. Twin beds, slippers lined up, a chair in the corner. The hair on her arms slowly settled. She breathed out a long, careful sigh. Just tired. Overtired. She left the lamp on that night, letting herself doze with the room lit pale as old bone. But the next night, and every night after, the routine continued. The presence, the feeling, never happened when the light was on. Only in darkness, never shifting or growing bolder, always simply sitting, observing, at the foot of her bed. Alice began to resent it, in her own quiet way. It wasn't fair, she was here to help, not to be haunted by a house's leftover feeling. It didn't lessen with logic. She tried different approaches. Some evenings she left the hall light on, but the mattress pressed unevenly, the darkness imperfect and the presence did not quite form. Other nights she turned off the lamp but kept her phone screen bright, pretending to read for longer, but the feeling would wait patiently until the blue light faded. Only then would the tension build in the air, poised at the very point her gaze drifted. The presence seemed to obey rules she could not name. She tried to trick it by varying her schedule, reading later, brushing her teeth at a different hour, but the feeling always came once she'd followed her nightly rhythm and the lamp was off. It was a calm, inevitable wait. She wondered often if her aunt knew about it, if, perhaps, this was simply how the house filled itself when left alone. As the nights multiplied, subtle differences crept into Alice's perception of the room. The way the air settled at night began to feel just a slight bit colder at the foot of the bed, her toes tingling if she let them stray too far from the warmth of the blanket. She found herself shying away from the edge, curling her knees higher. She placed a pillow at the end, but it made no difference. The feeling was not of something on the bed, but at the end, steady, unmoving, abiding in the darkness. It was not a new loneliness, but a presence, patient and nearly polite. There was never any attempt to make her afraid, not in the obvious sense. But each morning, Alice awoke more aware that her nights belonged to someone else's routine as much as her own. She noticed more now in the daylight, too. The house's sounds grew sharper, the click of the fridge door, the faint glug-glug of the pipes, the clock's tick seeming to stand out louder in the smaller hours. She found herself standing longer by the windows, looking out onto the slow, rain-washed street, as if confirming the world outside still moved as it should. The presence became something between a secret and a companion. Not a friend, but an unchanging fact of the house. There were days she tried to imagine it as her late uncle, maybe a piece of memory lingering, content to sit with her in the quiet. Sometimes, though, the certainty that this was not anyone she'd ever known made her skin crawl. One rainy afternoon, Alice finally mentioned the house in a call with her aunt. "Do you ever feel like you're not alone at Larchview, Ruth?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. Her aunt was silent for a moment, then chuckled. "Old houses have lots of memories, dear. You know that. Don't let it put you off." It would have been easier if Ruth had said something more specific, admitted to feeling watched, or mentioned the sense of someone on the edge of the bed. But Ruth simply carried on talking about the hospital food and her favorite nurse. Alice didn't press. Night after night, the same pattern. She could almost mark the arrival of the feeling to the minute. It became a certainty, and the raw anxiety dulled into a cautious anticipation. It was like the house itself needed a witness, a body, a particular rhythm to call out whatever sat in the dark. Some nights she imagined sitting up, speaking out loud. "What do you want?" or perhaps simply, "I know you're there." But Alice was not a dramatic woman. She let it be, and with each night, the presence became neither stronger nor weaker, simply more reliable, as if her compliance was all it required. That's when new small irregularities began. Twice, she awoke and found the blanket at the foot of the bed askew, rumpled as if tugged, though she hadn't tossed or turned. Once, she noticed a small indent at the mattress's end, the kind of dip left by a heavy book or a folded sweater. When she pressed her hand there, the fabric felt marginally cooler. These things troubled her more than she liked to admit. Still, each morning, the evidence vanished. The shape of the bed, the pattern of her slippers on the floor, the settled air, all resumed their empty calm by daylight. The rules remained clear: only darkness, only at that hour, only in the quiet. The room held its secret, and Alice carried her uncertainty into the fragile safety of day, always wondering what would happen if she changed the routine or broke the silence. By the 10th night, Alice found herself drawn more tightly into the rituals of Larchview, as if every small action mattered more than before. She was growing careful in ways she couldn't explain to herself: precision with the way she folded the corner of the sheet, the exact angle of the lamp on the nightstand, the gentle alignment of her heels together before she sank into bed. Small, familiar tasks became anchors. There was a particular comfort in the structure, even as it doubled as a kind of private superstition. Perhaps, she thought, there was a rule to the presence: maybe if she followed the steps just right, it would leave her alone. Or perhaps it was the opposite, her routines inviting it nearer, each repetition confirming its right to share the room. The rain eased, leaving the air faintly metallic, the world outside oddly sharp in its quietness. Alice noticed the difference as she opened the window for fresh air before bed, the scent of wet bark and pavement drifting in. She made chamomile tea and carried it carefully to her nightstand. For a moment, Alice let herself float in the warmth and the soft shadows, pretending the house was hers, that her days and nights were not borrowed. But always, as the quiet hours drew close, tension returned. 10:30 remained her threshold. She sometimes lingered over her book, rereading passages just to delay the moment when she must turn off the lamp and surrender Larchview to its nightly rhythm. That evening, as she lay in bed, Alice listened to the useless ticking of her phone charger and asked herself, with a chill, why she did not simply leave the light on. Why not take back the rules? But she knew the answer. A grown woman, she was afraid not of what she could see, but of the invisible pull in the dark. Each night without sleep weighed on her. She had started considering her choices as old logic, superstition against the unknown, but she felt trapped by her own need for rest and the absurdity of being haunted by nothing at all. On the 11th night, the mattress seemed to move faintly below her feet as if someone shifted just an inch at the end of the bed. Alice's breath caught, heart stuttering, but she could not move. The sensation lasted only a breath and then vanished. She burrowed deeper into bed, fingers gripping the edge of the sheet, and let herself believe it was a trick of nerves. Sleep grew thinner and more uncertain. Each dawn found her waking early, disoriented, pressing her palms to the cool end of the mattress as if looking for evidence. There never was any. The impression of company lingered in her mind more than her body. At breakfast, she felt watched. Her days became fractal, her mind looping back to the question of what waited each night, narrowing her thoughts. She ate less, grew pale in the house's cold morning light. Friends called, checking in, and she made mild excuses, blaming long hours working, pretending she found the routine restful. But every evening, dread grew. She started charting the exact minute, the moment darkness fell, and the presence quietly, unfailingly, returned to its seat. Once, summoned by a surge of irritation, she snapped on the lamp just as the feeling gathered. The room returned instantly to its bland normalcy. No hint of movement, only her own tight jaw reflected in the mirror across the room. The stillness after such moments was not relief but hollow, like a breath interrupted. On the 12th night, Alice sat up and spoke into the blackness after the lamp went off. "I know you're there." Her words felt heavy, ridiculous. Nothing happened. The presence did not flicker or withdraw. It simply waited, as if her awareness, her naming, meant nothing to it at all. She tried, over the next nights, different strategies. She left music playing quietly, but as soon as the last light died, the presence resumed. She tried leaving the door half open, but the sensation pooled still at the end of her bed, unaffected by the gap or the bleed of dim hall light. Once, she moved to the other twin bed, but the feeling relocated with her, the seat at the base of her new chosen bed filling just as quietly as before. The specifics changed, the rules did not. Was it loneliness that filled the room, she wondered, or something older, more embedded in the foundation of the house? Alice felt subtly displaced in time, as if her routines no longer coincided precisely with those of the world outside. More than once, waking briefly in the patchwork darkness of the night, she wondered if her days had become misaligned, her sense of self slightly unmoored from the calendar. She began to notice signs that the room itself was shifting, a drawer on the dresser, left open a crack when she was sure she'd closed it, the bottle of water rolling slightly toward the foot of the bed, shoes that edged closer to the wall overnight. All of it dismissible, easy to blame on her own distraction, but the cumulative sense filled her with growing uncertainty. In the third week, Alice's dreams became sharper. She'd sensed the presence in sleep, unable to move, perhaps expecting to see something at the room's end and always waking before she reached the certainty. Some mornings she checked herself for marks, for any sign she'd left her bed or been touched in the night. There was never anything but her own vague imprint in twisted sheets, a faint tired sting behind her eyes. Sleep itself became a negotiation. She started rationing her hours, sitting up far later than usual, as if the presence kept a ledger and would penalize her for every moment stolen from the dark. Every night, as the hour drew close and she switched off the lamp, Alice braced herself. The quiet pulled tight. The presence arrived, not hostile, not kind, simply correct. At first nothing happened. After a minute or two, her breathing would slow and she'd sense, with perfect certainty, a body's careful weight seated at the end of her bed. No shift, no sigh, just the coolness of something pressing lightly against the dark, observing her in turn. By the 14th day, it felt as if the routine mattered to the presence herself, as if the nightly return was not random, but chosen. That knowledge pressed at her sanity, gentle and persistent, as if asking her to take it seriously, to acknowledge the silent schedule that joined both of them to the room. Alice's skepticism was subtle now, a thin defensive shield against a pattern growing tighter every night. The last few days of Alice's stay felt heavy and unspooling, every hour echoing with the rhythm of her borrowed life. Largeview's autumn leaves had faded to brittle gold, and dawn came fragrant with the tired dampness of late October. Alice functioned, barely, work, emails, the simple meals, but the pattern of her sleep, and the silent presence at the foot of her bed, had gathered into a kind of nightly contract. She walked the halls in the afternoons, hand trailing over the wall, fingertips catching on the sharp edges of framed photos whose faces now seemed unfamiliar. She noticed every detail. The guest room, once bland and safe, grew quietly oppressive in its sameness. Nothing ever changed in the daylight, but in the night, the sense of being watched, of being shared, pressed in on every ritual. On the 16th night, a thin, patient drizzle spat on the windowpanes. Alice entered the guest room and stood by the door, staring at her carefully made bed. She was exhausted, truly exhausted, a fatigue not only of body but of something deeper, some internal faculty for resistance quietly spent. She brushed her teeth, folded her pajamas, realigned the lamp until everything was exactly as it should be. She sent one last text to Ruth, answering routine questions about the mail. The normalcy of it stung her. At 10:30, Alice put the phone down, took a deep breath, and flicked the lamp off for what she hoped would be the last time before leaving. She did not wait long to feel it, the careful weight at the foot of her bed, the peaceful but absolute knowledge of someone sitting there. In the stillness, her mind opened quietly, offering no resistance. Alice wondered, softly, what would happen if she simply acknowledged it, allowed herself to truly accept its presence. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply let time pass, feeling the presence as a quiet, gathering certainty. Minutes went by. Her breathing slowed, her thoughts warm and distracted by images with no narrative, leaves on damp sidewalks, the sound of her mother humming in another room. The calm beneath her anxiety was soft, like surrender. She thought, for a moment, that she heard the softest hushed sound, a sigh or the faint shifting of clothing, but the room held its silence, the darkness as absolute as ever. She did not try to see. She only let her awareness stretch in the dark, knowing perfectly that she was not alone. Eventually, Alice drifted into sleep. No dreams crowded her, just the sense of abiding company, not cruel, not kind, simply necessary. She woke before dawn, the presence gone, the old house lifting itself back into emptiness and order. On her last day, Alice packed methodically. Every item restored, every drawer checked. In the full clarity of morning, the room looked as it always had, mirror unclouded, blanket straight, lamp angled as she left it. She paused at the edge of the bed, her hand hovering over the mattress. With gentle, almost affectionate pressure, she smoothed the covers one last time. Aunt Ruth greeted her at the door, their reunion quiet, neither woman feeling the need for more than polite embraces and updates. Alice handed back the key, only mentioning the importance of routines and the careful management of nightlights, nothing more. Driving away, Alice knew something subtle inside herself had shifted. She would never be as careless with sleep again. There would always be a corner of every night that held company, silent and correct, waiting for awareness. She did not feel haunted, exactly, just changed. The presence had marked her not as a target, but as a participant in a contract older than the house itself. Alice slept in her own bed that night. When she switched off the lamp, her pulse jumped, but nothing happened. The room was empty, soft, belonging only to her. Yet, in the heart of darkness, she felt a gentle memory, a space at the foot of the bed, holding its quiet vigil. Not a companion, not a threat, but a new understanding. From now on, Alice would always remember to look for what waits, quietly, at the correct hour, in the safe, secret dark.